Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. Border czar Tom Homan says unprecedented cooperation with local law enforcement has enabled a drawdown of 700 federal agents. Homan also addresses body cameras and anti-ICE roadblocks. The Trump administration is unveiling its biggest plan yet to rebuild critical minerals supply chains aimed at countering China's dominance. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is hosting a meeting today with officials from several dozen nations. Ukraine says military issues take center stage as U.S., Russian, and Ukrainian envoys meet in Abu Dhabi. And President Trump says he had a productive phone call with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping. Convicted would-be Trump assassin Ryan Ruth faces sentencing today. Prosecutors seek life in prison for his 2024 plot at a Florida golf course. The Washington Post is laying off 1/3 of its staff. The paper's executive editor says its Washington area news department and editing staff will be restructured.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Today is Wednesday, February 4th. I'm Kevin Hogan. Border czar Tom Homan said today federal agencies made significant progress working with state and local officials in Minneapolis. Homan said the improvements in cooperation have enabled a drawdown of hundreds of officers.
We currently have an unprecedented number of counties communicating with us now and allowing ICE to take custody of illegal aliens before they hit the streets. Unprecedented cooperation. And I'll say it again. This is efficient, requires only 1 or 2 officers to assume custody of a criminal alien target rather than 8 or 10 officers going into the community and arresting that public safety threat. This frees up more officers to arrest or remove criminal aliens. More officers taking custody of criminal aliens directly from the jails means less officers on the street doing criminal operations. This is smart law enforcement, not less law enforcement. It's safer for the community, safer for the officers, and safer for the alien. Given this increase in unprecedented collaboration, and as a result of the need for less law enforcement officers to do this work in a safer environment, I have announced effective immediately we will draw down 700 people effective today. 700 law enforcement personnel. We have also fully integrated CBP personnel into the ICE ERO team structure under one unified chain of command. Not 2 chains of command. I want to be clear. Just because you prioritize public safety threats don't mean we forget about everybody else. We will continue to enforce the immigration laws in this country.
Homan also dispelled rumors about ICE asking jails to hold people past their release date, and he gave updates on body cameras for federal agents. The border czar also addressed reports of checkpoints being set up by anti-ICE activists. Homan praised agents for putting up with the hatred and violent rhetoric they face.
During our efforts to identify and implement improvements of how operations are planned, conducted, and managed, we identified a gap in regard to the use of body-worn cameras. And this was actually raised by the workforce when I started walking around talking to people here. Some officers and agents had them, some didn't. That inconsistency was unacceptable. So we moved immediately to prioritize full body cam deployment in the city. I discussed this with Secretary Noem a couple of days ago, and she made the decision to deploy them. The plan is to deploy them nationwide, but it's a priority for the city right now. We want to be fully transparent in what we do. The American people seek and deserve professional and trustworthy law enforcement, and I and the President expect that any misconduct will not be tolerated and will be swiftly addressed. And it's shameful and incomprehensible to me that this unlawful and threatening behavior is being tolerated by anyone. As far as what I saw yesterday with the roadblocks being set up, you're not going to stop ICE. You're not going to stop Border Patrol. The only thing you're doing is irritating your community and want to go get groceries or pick their children up or whatever. I talked to the chief of police, and he committed to taking swift action on those illegal roadblocks. They're illegal. We shouldn't tolerate them. Again, a complete drawdown is going to depend on the cooperation, continued cooperation of local and state law enforcement, and the decrease of the violence, the rhetoric, and the attacks against ICE and Border Patrol. The federal law enforcement personnel, ICE and CBP, and other partner agencies are patriots. And they've carried out their duties patriotically, with integrity, with professionalism, and compassion.
Homan said the administration's goal in Minneapolis is ultimately a complete drawdown, but he said that's contingent on cooperation and stopping the violence against ICE and Border Patrol agents. The border czar said no one's done border security better than President Trump. Homan mentioned that he worked for 6 presidents and 10 administrations when it comes to public safety and border security. He said the current success is unprecedented. Homan detailed some figures from the surge. He said federal agents have arrested 14 criminal illegal immigrants who had homicide convictions, 87 with sex offenses, 139 with assault convictions, and 28 gang members. There's a sharpened focus on critical minerals in Washington this week. Vice President JD Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosted more than 50 countries in Washington, D.C. The goal is to band together and weaken China's grip on critical minerals. House lawmakers are also addressing the concern with a vote later today. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the report.
The Trump administration is racing to lessen global dependence on China for critical minerals. These minerals are used to make everyday products, especially high-tech and EV products. Right now, the U.S. relies on China for nearly 90% of minerals.
And then once they control that industry, and they're the only ones in the world that do it, then they can charge you anything they want, but they can also use it against you as leverage. Or it could be disrupted if there's any sort of global disruption.
The national security concerns became more evident last year when Beijing imposed export controls on rare earths, causing productions delays and shutdowns for auto manufacturers in America and Europe.
We want to eliminate that problem of people flooding into our markets with cheap critical minerals to undercut our domestic manufacturers. The people who undercut them then jack up the price to a completely unfair level.
The vice president announced at today's critical minerals meeting that the U.S. will establish a price floor system for critical minerals. He and the Secretary of State today welcomed more than 50 nations to the meeting, including South Korea, Japan, and Germany.
As geopolitical risks continue to rise, we will redouble our efforts to secure alternative supply sources.
The nations are banding together to kickstart an international push to diversify critical mineral supply chains. Several countries have signed on to a trading bloc put forth by the White House.
Is an opportunity at self-reliance, that we never have to rely on anybody else except for each other for the critical minerals necessary to sustain our industries and to sustain growth.
Today's meeting comes after President Trump earlier this week signed an executive order to create a new strategic private sector critical mineral stockpile.
We even expect the American taxpayer to make a profit from the interest on the loan used to start the Project Vault.
Project Vault already has buy-in from some of the biggest U.S. companies like General Motors, Boeing, and Google. The executive action is followed by a vote later today in Congress. House lawmakers will vote on the Critical Mineral Dominance Act. It aims to speed up and expand mineral production on federal lands through efforts like making public lands easier to access for exploration and mining. Critics have expressed environmental concerns of expediting mining, though many Democrats have also acknowledged the economic and national security issues at stake. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Breaking just now, President Trump spoke with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping today. Just moments ago, Trump posted on Truth Social saying the call was long and productive. Trump said many important subjects were discussed, including trade, military, the April trip that he will be making to China. Taiwan, the war between Russia and Ukraine, and the current situation with Iran, the purchase of oil and gas by China from the United States, the consideration by China of the purchase of additional agricultural products, including lifting the soybean count to 20 million tons for the current season, airplane engine deliveries, and numerous other subjects, all which Trump said were very positive. Trump added that the relationship with China and his personal relationship with Xi is an extremely good one, and that they both realize how important it is to keep it that way. He believes that there will be many positive results achieved over the next 3 years of his presidency having to do with Xi and the PRC. Xi and Trump last spoke by phone in late November. Officials from the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia are meeting today. Ukraine says the latest round of peace talks will focus on military issues.
The focus of these peace talks will primarily be on military and military political issues. This is clear from the composition of the delegations meeting there. There are many nuances regarding how, hypothetically, the war could end, which is Ukraine is interested in.
The delegations from Moscow and Kyiv and Abu Dhabi were joined by U.S. officials. Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, were expected to be with the American team. The Abu Dhabi talks were held amid Ukrainian outrage over major Russian attacks on its energy system. A huge Russian bombardment overnight from Monday to Tuesday included hundreds of drones and a record 32 ballistic missiles, wounding at least 10 people. The European Union is weighing in on today's trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi. A spokesperson for the European Commission says Russia is abusing the ceasefire talks to attack civilian infrastructure in Ukraine.
Putin can end this war right now. He doesn't show any signs of wanting to do so. He misuses even the discussions on the ceasefire to continuously attack the civilian infrastructure and kill innocent people.
Just one day before today's talks, Russia launched a major attack on Ukraine using over 500 drones and 30 ballistic missiles. Kyiv officials say the strikes left over 1,000 people without heating. This attack was significant because Ukraine says it violated a one-week ceasefire on energy infrastructure. President Trump brokered the temporary truce amid frigid temperatures across Ukraine. Russia's attacks on energy often leave thousands without heating, similar to what happened yesterday. Trump says yesterday's strikes didn't violate the ceasefire because it had already expired on Sunday. House lawmakers say that Medicare and Medicaid fraud isn't an issue just in Minnesota. It's common around the country. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the details.
What's happening in Minnesota's Medicaid program is critical and worth discussing. But it is just the tip of the iceberg. Medicare and Medicaid fraud is common. It's happening nationwide.
The House Energy and Commerce Oversight Subcommittee examined Medicaid and Medicare fraud issues across the country. Representative Joyce says that some put fraud loss estimates at $100 billion annually.
This is only a conservative estimate because fraud can only be accounted for if it's detected.
Joyce gives case examples in New York, Florida, Nevada, and Arizona.
7 defendants across Arizona and Nevada were charged in connection with an alleged $1.1 billion Medicare fraud scheme for medically unnecessary amniotic wound allografts, commonly known as skin substitutes.
Some Democrats allege that the Trump administration is misusing the word fraud.
Can you walk us through the difference between improper payments and fraud, please?
All fraudulent payments are improper, but not all improper payments are fraudulent. And in fact, when we see the data points, if you have over $90 billion of improper payments, about 77% of that is administrative error and not actual intentional fraud.
Wow, I'm just sitting here trying to think we're splitting hairs over the word fraud when what's going on in Minnesota, what's going on in Los Angeles. Gosh, if that doesn't undermine confidence in the system, nothing else does.
One witness says that managing healthcare data is a huge hurdle.
Data is a big issue in healthcare fraud. We have complicated data and poor data criteria in general. It's very inconsistent and hard to understand.
One concern brought up is how fast fraudsters can replicate a fraud scheme in certain areas when they see an opportunity. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
More on healthcare. It costs about $500 a month to insure a 40-year-old man. The reason? Obamacare, according to numerous experts and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Here to tell us more about how the foundation of Obamacare led to cracks in the insurance market and high premiums is Lawrence Wilson, a reporter for the Epoch Times. Lawrence, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Your latest report shows that premiums went up over 80% in 5 years for individuals and small groups. How has the Affordable Care Act contributed to this?
Well, the Affordable Care Act was designed around certain features which were intended to make health insurance more accessible to a wider group of people and more affordable, especially to people who weren't insured or couldn't buy health insurance. Well, what appears to have happened is that some of these foundations of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, created Obamacare. What happened is that some of these provisions actually had the perverse effect of driving up prices and making it harder to afford health insurance.
So, Lawrence, let's expand on this. Government data shows that there has been a decline of about 1 million this year, with high costs as these enhanced tax credits meant to keep costs down expired. Why would a sustainable healthcare system need subsidies to survive?
Well, Obamacare was built on subsidies, so that's how it was designed, that the government would pay a portion of the healthcare premium for individuals in a certain age, in a certain income bracket for lower middle income people. Well, as these enhanced subsidies, these are the ones that just expired, they were added in 2021 to cope with the effects of COVID. But they had the effect as well of raising premiums so that during that period, premiums just shot up again as they had stabilized after a period of growth in the early years. To put it simply, it became a vicious circle. The more money you put in, the higher the premiums go, the more money the government needs to put in so that people can afford their insurance premiums. It just spiraled because of these enhanced subsidies in part.
Well, and when you talk about expanded access, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, they say that 23 million people had these ACA or Obamacare plans in 2026. Open to comment more on that number. And some experts said that youth enrollment in Obamacare would reach 38%. That never happened. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, it's been at or below 28% for over a decade. Why?
Well, that was one of the pillars of Obamacare. One of these foundational things that made it work was called the individual mandate. Everybody had to buy health insurance, and that included younger people. Now, that was intended to even out the risk for the insurers because younger people don't cost as much to insure. They don't get sick as much. They don't go to the doctor as much. But younger people also know that, and so they find it easier to go without health insurance, especially because Obamacare raised premiums for everybody, but they went up more for younger people because of another foundation, something called community rating, so that it no longer were people judged or priced purely on their age or health factors, but it was more or less the same for everybody in a geographic region. So younger people have opted out. It's been about 28% or lower for the entire history of Obamacare.
Very interesting. And what can you tell us about the Trump administration's healthcare affordability plan? How different would this be to what exists now?
Well, the difference primarily is that it depends on free market forces in order to keep prices regulated rather than government regulation. So some of the things that are included there are the attempts to lower drug prices, create more competition there, and the attempts as well to give people health savings accounts that are funded. So rather than giving a subsidy to an insurance company, you make that available to the individual. You go do whatever you want for healthcare. You can buy insurance or do whatever. But Democrats have opposed those free market reforms either way, it's complex because right now about 62% of people are covered by employer-sponsored insurance. About 30% of people are receiving some form of federally subsidized health care through Medicare, Medicaid, or Obamacare. So it's a very broad problem and very difficult to solve.
Well, it is a conundrum, and when we talk about the penalty, that mandate going up from maybe just under $100 to over $600 for a person who didn't want to buy into Obamacare, that doesn't, on the surface, appear to be a free market solution to this. But now, if you have people who maybe have pre-existing conditions, may find it hard to get insurance, is there any way to include those people in a broader healthcare plan, governmental organization plan, that can help bring that, but not bring the high prices that we've seen from Obamacare?
Well, this is the problem. When you have an insurance program versus pure health coverage, which is just will pay for your health costs, whatever they are, when it's insurance, that depends on risk. So insurers used to price their premiums based on risk. And if you knew that a person was already suffering from a chronic illness, for example, then you would price them higher because you knew they'd go to the doctor more and they were more likely to have a serious illness. When you make insurance available to everyone, regardless of health conditions, which is what Obamacare did in its markets, people like that because everybody can be insured. But it's almost guaranteed to increase the cost of the insurance because insurers have to recoup the money that they're spending on care somehow, and that's through increased premiums.
Understood. If you want something, you have to pay for it. Now, also, there's another pillar of the Obamacare Foundation, which is this demographics pricing coordination. Can you elaborate on the effects that this has had?
Well, that, again, was almost guaranteed to increase the cost of insurance. Insurers used to rate or price people based on their own health profile or of the small group that they were in, say a small company, their employees. And so if everybody that worked at your company was, say, above 60 years old, well, it was going to cost you a little more for health insurance. If you had a company that had 25 people working for you, they were all below age 35, well, it would probably cost you less. No more. With Obamacare, people are rated based on their geographic region with only slight variations for age and for whether or not they use tobacco. Other than that, everybody who's, say, 40 years old will pay about the same price for insurance. And that, to balance it out, insurers just had to raise prices for everybody.
And Lawrence, you've been doing so much research on this, and we've seen that Obamacare has some shortfalls. It's driving up prices. We look back even to 2014. Maybe we can go back a little bit further. Do we have evidence that suggests that this free market approach does work? Because we have evidence to suggest that Obamacare isn't providing the solutions that Americans need right now.
The best evidence for that would come from other industries because healthcare was already highly regulated before Obamacare. So that's been a feature in the healthcare industry for a long time. And again, a large percentage of people who have some sort of health coverage have it already provided by the federal government. Tens of millions of people through Medicare, Medicaid, the Veterans Administration, and so on. So we haven't really had a true free market in healthcare for quite a long time.
Very fascinating. So what are the next practical steps, say for lawmakers or for the average American, in order to get the healthcare coverage they need at an affordable price?
Well, there are alternatives that are neither Obamacare nor traditional insurance. There are some things out there like health sharing plans. There are a number of those that people basically form an association together in order to help share the costs of their own medical coverage. There are other ways to get health insurance that are less expensive. For example, some, especially younger people, will buy catastrophic insurance or some form of insurance that only pays for major things. So if you have to go to the doctor, you pay for that out of your own pocket, but maybe it's cheaper than paying premiums every month for a traditional healthcare program. Legislatively, it's going to be anybody's guess. There are two forces at work here. One are those who are looking to expand free market options, and there's the other side who says, hey, the only way we can really do this is to get more government control over healthcare and the delivery of healthcare. And they've been battling it out in Congress. As you've seen, these Obamacare enhanced subsidies were just one example. And we'll have to see what Congress does with that over the long term.
Understood. Lawrence Wilson, great talking to you today. A lot of important knowledge brought out. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And as we've been covering here, the Washington Post is laying off 1/3 of its staff. The large-scale reductions include cutting its sports department and the number of journalists stationed overseas. Executive Director Matt Murray announced the layoffs in a Zoom meeting with staff. Murray told employees that the newspaper's Washington area news department and editing staff would be restructured. The Post would also suspend its Post Reports podcast. News organizations are struggling to compete amid a rise of independent journalists, podcasters, and content creators. The Post announced layoffs last year, but said the cuts would not impact its newsroom. The Washington Post is owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. A convicted would-be assassin will face justice today. A federal judge will sentence Ryan Wesley Ruth for attempting to assassinate Donald Trump during the 2024 presidential campaign. Prosecutors are seeking a life sentence. They argue the 60-year-old carefully planned for months to kill Trump in West Palm Beach. A jury convicted Ruth last year on 5 felony counts, including attempted assassination of a major presidential candidate. Authorities say Ruth hid in bushes near the course, pointing a military-style rifle toward Trump and a Secret Service agent before fleeing. Ruth attempted to harm himself after the guilty verdict. His attorneys now argue for a lighter sentence, citing mental health concerns. The search for Today's Show anchor Savannah Guthrie's mother continues. Authorities are sifting through leads with the help of the FBI, but many questions remain, and there's still no suspect. Here's the latest.
I think it's terrible. I think it's a terrible thing.
President Donald Trump on Tuesday weighing in on the disappearance of Today's Show anchor Savannah Guthrie's 84-year-old mother, Nancy Guthrie.
Would you commit to more federal agents like helping out on the search?
Sure, I would. I'm going to call her later on. I think it's a terrible thing. I always got along very good with Savannah.
Nancy Guthrie's family reported her missing around noon Sunday.
Having referenced Nancy, a white female, 84 years of age, 5'2" medium build, eyebrow blue. Nancy has high blood pressure, pacemaker, and cardiac issues.
On Tuesday, sheriff's officials said investigators were working through any data that may be available about a pacemaker. The Pima County Sheriff also spoke about samples of DNA from Guthrie's home.
We've submitted all kinds of samples for DNA, and we've gotten some back, but nothing to indicate any suspects.
Meanwhile, at least 2 outlets, including a TV station in Tucson, reported they had received what appeared to be a ransom note. The sheriff was asked about that Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into all that. We are following all leads we have. We are sharing all of our leads with the FBI. They are helping us in evaluating those leads.
In a post on X, the sheriff's department said it was aware of reports involving possible ransom notes in the case, adding in a statement that there was, quote, no credible information indicating this was a targeted incident.
Forecasters say relief from the cold may finally be on the way. The Arctic blast and the winter storm that came with it are among the deadliest in recent history, with the death toll now above 100. Here's more.
A deadly stretch of Arctic air and ice is still gripping much of the country. Over 100 deaths have been reported nationwide, along with prolonged power outages. At its peak, more than 1 million customers lost power, and tens of thousands still remain in the dark. Nashville, Tennessee is one of the worst affected in terms of outages.
As far as power infrastructure damage, Winter Storm Firm will be one for the history books, the greatest damage to our system in the history of the organization.
The electric service said yesterday it had restored power to 96% of its customers. Crews are still replacing hundreds of broken poles.
And right now, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem is giving a press conference in Arizona where she's announcing a border wall update. Let's tune into that.
Greatest humanitarian crisis that we had ever seen in our history, and that it needed to be fixed. And the way that you fix it is you just enforce the law. That you go out there and say the laws need to be enforced and they need to be applied equally to every single person. And that Americans come first because they're the people who have built this country, and that they're the ones who are here working jobs and putting their kids through school and doing the right thing to make sure that our freedom and our liberties are secured. So I want to thank him for his leadership, for the fact that he told the American people what we needed. He said we needed a wall, and we have a wall, a big, beautiful wall that President Trump also wanted painted black, so that it would endure for a long period of time, that it would look like the strength and stamina that the American people have, and that it would be something that would continue to protect us for generations to come. But I also wanted to come here today and thank all of you. I'm looking out in this group of individuals and I see a group of patriots, people who stepped up during difficult times and led us through challenges, but also are still here today making sure that we continue down the path of what we committed to the American people. I want to thank all the individuals I see from CBP, from ICE, the Coast Guard. I see our law enforcement partners, the Department of War, National Guard, all of our local sheriffs and law enforcement that have partnered with us, and then those individuals who kept the faith, that came alongside of us and encouraged our law enforcement, stood beside them and supported them and their families. We know that no one can do their job with excellence unless their family's okay and they're taken care of and that things are right at home. And so those individuals in this community that supported our law enforcement through those times are incredibly important, and we're grateful for them. The high degree of talent and experience that we have here today is a testament to not just President Trump's commitment, but also to the people that have secured the border and have also worked every single day to make sure that America is safe again. In President Trump's first year back in office, we've delivered the most secure border in American history. And we did it with the immediate aftermath we were facing from that humanitarian crisis that was created from Joe Biden's open border policies. It is so quiet here now today that sometimes we even forget how bad it was just a little over a year ago. And the importance of the accomplishment that has happened over this last year cannot be forgotten. Hardworking Americans all along this southern border were devastated. They were trying to do their jobs, educate their kids, and protect the future when they were handed this humanitarian crisis and saw the horrors of what was happening when millions of people were crossing our border unvetted, when they were trespassing onto private property. We had crimes being committed. We saw women and children being trafficked, people dying, and crimes continue to be perpetuated as people were allowed to come into the country unvetted and unstopped. You know, yesterday I was in Eagle Pass, Texas, and I had the chance to tour the border, not just with our Border Patrol agents, but also with the Texas National Guard and the Texas Department of Public Safety. And we looked at some of the areas that were the hardest hit during the Biden border policies. In September of 2023, Eagle Pass saw an unprecedented crisis face them. In fact, they had to declare a state of emergency due to the rush of illegal aliens that were coming into their town and through their community to get into the United States. On one day, they saw over 10,000 people come through that area to get into the United States unvetted and illegally. In just a couple of days, it doubled the population of their town. And it caused a crisis not just for their medical care facilities, their businesses, and their families, but it absolutely crushed them and their economy. And their crime was rampant and overrun. And just last week, or a week or so ago, I got to spend some time in Brownsville, Texas, spent some time with farmers and ranchers. And we talked about what their lives were like just a little over a year and a half ago. How they saw trespassers come onto their property, cut their fences. Their livestock were loose, and sometimes they incurred death there as well. They had crimes, people breaking into their homes and their facilities. They were finding dead bodies on their ranches. In fact, we saw unprecedented death from those illegal migrants that were coming into our country because of the heat exhaustion, and they also were forced into water, and people were drowning because of the crush and the push to take advantage of those open border policies. Those ranchers were talking about how different it was for them now. The fact that their ranches are safe again, that they don't have drug cartels running drugs across their property and down their roads and endangering their children and their schools. Many of the schools in many of these communities had to put up barriers and protections and boulders and rocks just between the roads and their schools to keep their children safe so they could go in and out and get their education in a way that would protect their lives. When things like this happen, people are not just challenged with the crime, but they're challenged with the fact that their economy is hurt, their businesses are hurt, and also that these illegal migrants were being victimized each and every day. At worst, illegal aliens threatened the lives of American citizens with crime and violence and drugs. But they brought with them a recognition that the rule of law didn't matter in America anymore, that laws weren't going to be enforced. And it sent a message around the world that people could just come to America and no one was going to do anything about letting those dangerous individuals come in with terrorists, suspected terrorists and criminals that were allowed to come in with those illegal migrants. And while the left tries to tell us many times that it's somehow compassionate to allow that kind of chaos, it isn't. It was dangerous, not just on this side of the border, but on the Mexican side of the border as well. We saw many of those illegal migrants not be able to survive the brutal terrain. They didn't survive the river crossing. Those causes of death, of heat and water were dangerous, and the left behind so many bodies that in some counties along the border, they had to install migrant morgues just to pick up the dead bodies that were passing away on their way to try to get into the United States. In fact, during the Biden administration and those open border policies, we saw even the UN declare that the United States and Mexico border was the deadliest land route in the world. Countless people were sexually abused and trafficked over and over again and exploited. One story that I remember that impacted me so dramatically was a horrifying story of a father who paid a smuggler $1,000 to bring his wife and his 2-year-old daughter into the United States. Once they got over the border, those smugglers took that mom and daughter into a stash house and kidnapped them and held them hostage for a ransom and said that father would not get them back unless he paid another $23,000 to them, and said if he did not immediately pay, that they would do things to his daughter that he couldn't even imagine. That was happening on a daily basis because of that invasion. Over those 4 years of chaos and destruction and death, many of the left said that it was compassionate. They said it was compassionate to let millions of people come in unvetted and be subjected to murderers and smugglers and cartels and gang members. Was it compassionate to make Americans share their communities with criminals? Was it compassionate to encourage men and women and children to break the law and to put their lives at risk, knowing that they could be victimized along the way? And was it compassionate to demonize those federal law enforcement officers that took an oath to uphold the law and to keep Americans safe? You know, the left and Democrats dare to harass, threaten, and dox our officers, assault the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security and our federal law enforcement. And they try to say that enforcing our immigration laws and arresting and deporting illegal criminals and violent criminals is inhumane. Well, what about the victims of that illegal crimes? What about the flow of drugs that were coming over our border and killing our next generation of Americans? What about the angel families who lost someone that they dearly love, that they'll never have back again and don't have a future with? They don't talk about the Laken Rileys, the Jocelyn Nungarys. They don't talk about the Rachel Morans. And they don't talk about the thousands of Americans that we've lost to drug overdoses and to poisonings. In fact, the flow over this border of illegal fentanyl has been cut in half since President Trump has been in office. And since he has secured this border and built this wall, 56% of the fentanyl has stopped coming into our country and saved millions of lives. The Democrats and the left say that compassion was that invasion, was that humanitarian crisis. But President Trump says that compassion is taking care of people. Joe Biden and his policies during those 4 years lost 450,000 children. Many times they placed them with sponsors that abused them, that trafficked them. The government paid people to take our children and to traffic them. Since President Trump's been in office, we've located 145,000 children that were lost, and we're not going to stop till we find every single one. Because of President Trump's leadership and his bold action, This country keeps breaking historic records. In fact, we have the lowest crime rate in this nation right now because of President Trump and his strength and securing our border that we've ever had in the history of this nation since we've been tracking crimes. The lowest murder rate that we've ever recorded in this country, and that's because we enforce the law and we hold criminals accountable for what they do to perpetuate violence against the American people. In fact, for the last 9 months, the Border Patrol has released 0 illegal aliens into the interior of the country. It's incredible, the work that they do every day. And that's what happens when you fight for law and order. Overall, Customs and Border Protection has recorded the lowest number of encounters in the agency's history in 2025. Daily encounters have fallen by 95% over the last year. While the daily average of apprehensions in the Biden years was over 5,100 per day, in the last year it was less than 250. In addition to keeping the illegal aliens out, we're also protecting the American people from the deadly drugs that are coming in. And just in 2025, CBP seized over 600,000 pounds of illicit drugs. The death rate and the fentanyl deaths in this country have dropped in 1 year under President Trump. Because he secured the border, fentanyl deaths have gone down 30%. We can't wait to continue to keep working to save more American lives. We have to continue to keep ramping up our efforts and do all that we can to protect our children. And we're thankful for President Trump's vision to invest in technology, invest in people, and invest in the resources that we need to do our jobs. He did it in 1 year. You think about what this country has gone through over the previous 4 years and what a turnaround that we've seen because we have a president in the White House that puts the American people first. It's incredible. President Trump believed that we still have a country, and he believed that it was a country worth fighting for. Now we're hard at work to make sure it stays that way. And when the American people put President Trump in the White House, they said enough is enough. They chose him, they chose law and order, they voted to build the wall, they voted to send President Trump back to the White House. And it reminds me of John Adams. He said back in history, when they were building this country and founding this country, he said the very definition of a republic is a government of laws, not of men. We are a government of laws. We are a republic. And for 4 long years before President Trump, we saw what it was like when people put men above our laws. We saw how people were victimized and hurt and abused. And Americans didn't want to live like that anymore. The beauty of our republic is that our people have the freedom to choose. And when they elected President Trump, they chose differently. They chose someone who recognized that a country with no border is no country at all. A country that doesn't enforce its laws is a lawless country. We had never experienced the kind of chaos before in recent history that we saw during the Biden administration. And the American people rejected it. They rejected it and its lawlessness and chose to return to law and order. And with President Trump and all of you great law enforcement officers in front of me and those across the country that do their work every day, we've got a promise of a bright future and a promise of an amazing country for years to come. You have stood up and stood on the line to make sure that we have freedom and liberty for our children and our grandchildren for years to come. Thank you for the work that you do. I pray every day that God will continue to bless you, bless the work that you set your hands to and your families. They'll continue to bless this great country so that we would know that we are all Americans and we're all here. The rest of the world follows America because we are the ones that provide the hope and the future for what the entire world should be. So may God bless you, and thank you so much.
And that was DHS Secretary Kristi Noem saying that they have the most secure border right now under President Trump in American history, leading to many benefits, some of them safer border communities, and in the interior, a 30% drop in fentanyl deaths, with less of that deadly drug coming across the southwest border. Now, coming up, Taiwan warns delays to a $40 billion defense plan could weaken deterrence against China. U.S. lawmakers push for full funding. And a new book warns the Chinese Communist Party is exploiting U.S. birthright citizenship as a weapon. Author Peter Schweizer says math-burst tourism could threaten American sovereignty and future elections. Stay tuned for that report. Welcome back. A sinister plot with major implications for the future of America. A new book says the Chinese Communist Party is exploiting U.S. birthright citizenship laws to undermine American sovereignty. The Invisible Coup author Peter Schweizer spoke with American Thought Leaders host Jan Jekielek to discuss the issue. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports.
We will fly you to the United States.
Peter Schweizer is the author of The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon. Schweizer says between 500,000 and 1 million American citizens may be loyal to the Chinese Communist Party.
It's a really large number of people, and I was shocked by it. The birthright citizenship issue to me is really central because it is a massive vulnerability and it's something that can be fixed.
Schweizer says the Chinese Communist Party is using birth tourism on an industrial scale.
Any numbers that we have related to how many Chinese nationals are flying to the United States, giving birth here, and then flying home with the baby, raising them in communist China, and then when they turn 18, they're going to be citizens, they can vote and do everything. Our federal government has no idea. We don't track this information.
He says the practice has been going on for years.
The Chinese government and some research firms say that over the past roughly 13 years, you have anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 Chinese nationals a year doing this for 13 years, which is stunning. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to support this in addition to the data from China.
Schweizer points to reports about flights between China and California.
Reports of, these flights from Los Angeles, LAX to Shanghai, where the entire business section is largely populated by newborn babies. So it's a huge problem.
He says birth tourism from China isn't just families seeking a better life.
That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about very systematic, and we're talking about something China did in Hong Kong for a while. It reached the point around 2010 that half of all newborns in Hong Kong were Chinese nationals getting birthright citizenship in Hong Kong. The government had to stop it. The government in Hong Kong at that point had to stop it because they said this is subversion. We can't allow this to go on. Something similar is playing out in the United States.
The Invisible Coup author says the approach reflects the CCP's broader strategy,
which is very smart, very sophisticated at exploiting the weaknesses of countries that it regards as enemies, and that certainly the United States would fit in that category.
Schweizer also says China's CCP-run People's Daily has promoted birth tourism, highlighting the 14th Amendment as a path to U.S. citizenship. One company he identifies as arranging such travel is called UNUSA.
And they brag on their websites who their clients are, and their clients are, according to them, military officers, intelligence officers, CCP officials, people from the Ministry of Propaganda. So these are not dissidents. These are pillars of the elite.
Schweizer believes the year 2030 will usher in 1 million U.S. citizens who have been raised in China participating in elections.
They're going to be voting in our elections. They're going to be donating to political campaigns. And let's remember the 2016 presidential election, it was settled by 72,000 votes. So 1 million votes is a lot of votes.
Schweizer is hopeful the Supreme Court takes issues like birth tourism from China into consideration when looking at birthright citizenship. One tool he says the Trump administration has used is charging offenders with visa fraud. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
I'm Kevin Hogan, and this is World Watch. The Navy has released footage from on board the USS Abraham Lincoln as tension between the U.S. and Iran intensifies. And filmed in the Arabian Sea late last month, video shows F-18s and F-35s taking off and the aircraft carrier taking on supplies. The release of the footage came hours after U.S. Central Command said an F-35 from the aircraft carrier shot down an Iranian drone. The drone aggressively approached the carrier with unclear intent. The military said the carrier was sailing about 500 miles from Iran's south coast at the time. The incident came as American and Iranian diplomats worked toward another round of negotiations over Tehran's nuclear program. Officials are expected to meet later this week. And the European Commission said it has opened an investigation into British politician Peter Mandelson. The probe came after the release of documents revealing his ties to Jeffrey Epstein.
As a matter of general practice, as you know, we have rules in place emanating from the treaty and the code of conduct that commissioners, including former commissioners, have to follow. And when we have an indication that some of these rules may not have been respected, then of course we follow up and we look into these potential breaches. And the short or the small update I can provide is that we will be assessing if, in light of these newly available documents, there might be breaches of the respective rules with regard to Peter Mandelson.
Mandelson was the European Commissioner for Trade from 2004 to 2008. A former ambassador to the U.S. as well, Mandelson said that he was appalled to have been mentioned in the latest batch of the Epstein files. Mandelson resigned from the House of Lords yesterday. He is now under investigation for alleged misconduct in office. Files released by the U.S. Justice Department last week include emails suggesting Mandelson had leaked government documents to Epstein. Mandelson has said he does not recall receiving payments from the financier. And Taiwan's president is warning that delays to a $40 billion defense spending package could send the wrong signal to allies. The comments come as pressure grows over security in the Indo-Pacific. President Lai Ching-te said opposition lawmakers blocking the plan risk slowing upgrades to missiles, drones, and a new air defense system. He said such foot-dragging could undermine confidence in Taiwan's ability to deter threats from China. U.S. lawmakers have also weighed in, urging Taiwan's parliament not to cut defense funding. The opposition party said it supports stronger security, but insists on tighter scrutiny of government spending. The dispute came as China increases military pressure around the island and repeats calls for closer ties. Taipei maintains that only the Taiwanese people can decide their future. And if you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at news.today@ntd.com. And we'll cover more news right after this break.